Welcome everybody belatedly to High Street Conversations. Welcome back after the summer break. Apologies for the slight delay. The heat is clearly getting to the technology here. So we've got a really important issue to discuss. So we'll be discussing the challenges of retail crime, which have been an issue for a while. And it's always been something this industry has focused on, but it feels like the past year, probably longer than that, there's been a real escalation. And we know there's been a real escalation because this week it's gone as far as Tesco saying that it is offering all of its staff body cameras on the shop floor. And this follows an article by Ken Murphy, the chief exec of Tesco, writing in the Mail on Sunday, where he says we cannot go on like this. All of our staff deserve to be safe at work. He's got real concerns about staff on the shop floor, real concerns about the state of retail crime. He says specifically crime is a scourge on society and an insult to shoppers and retail workers. It is time we put an end to it. And he also added that the abuse suffered by his staff on the shop floor was heartbreaking. Heartbreaking because of some of the challenges it has long term, both physically and mentally, where it is particularly violent. Tesco is not actually, if I didn't realize this, Tesco is not actually first to make the offer of body cameras. Sainsbury's, Waitrose, and the Co-op have already gone down that path. But Ken Murphy has gone even further. He's suggested that actually what should happen in England and Wales is that new legislation should be introduced that brings it into line with Scotland. In Scotland, what has happened is they have brought in what is called the Protection of Workers Act, where it is an offence to assault, threaten, or abuse retail staff, separating it from other crime to make the issue of identification of the problem and hopefully developing solutions to the problem much easier. So exactly how bad is the problem? Well, we've got an indication from the British Retail Consortium. It's always a challenge working with stats and data. I think for most people, it feels like there's a big difference between pre-COVID and post-COVID. That's something that the survey from the British Retail Consortium seems to back up. This was published in March. It looked at incidents during the year of 2021 to 2022. And during that time, they've recorded 850 daily incidences of retail crime. That's nearly double the pre-COVID level of 450 incidents a day during the year 2019 to 2020. The British Retail Consortium has also said that retail crime is now costing the high street £1.76 billion for the year, with nearly £1 billion of that directly being related to the loss of goods, and the rest is money spent on prevention. So it's quite considerable. So the next question is legislation really the way forward? And I guess partly understanding the answer to that question will be understanding exactly what the root causes are for the challenges we have now. Because to my mind, with a lack of resources, that seems to be the primary problem for the police. Legislation doesn't necessarily help the issue, and that seems to be what's at play. 2 weeks ago, the Scottish Grocers Federation called for more transparency around retail crime prosecutions, despite the legislation being in place. And they asked for that transparency because despite there being over 7,000 known cases of abuse and assault against shop workers, since the Protection of Workers Act came into force back in August 2021, so almost exactly 2 years ago, there's been absolutely no public information on how many of the perpetrators have been arrested and subsequently convicted. Because ultimately, even if the legislation is there, if the resources aren't there to bring people to justice, then surely it doesn't make a difference. Because we all know that previously, even without the Protection of Workers Act, that abuse, that assault and theft from retail stores is already a criminal offence. So does new legislation really help us, or is it a case of other challenges we have to deal with? is an inability to apprehend criminals also exacerbating the problem? That's the feeling I certainly got a couple of days ago attending the Business London Bid Summit. So this week, down in central London, we had a breakout work session on policing and crime and antisocial behaviour. It was attended by Sophie Linden, who is the Deputy Mayor of London with responsibility over crime and policing. And there were a number of bids that voiced their concerns about the lack of consequence for those people undertaking retail crimes. And that lack of consequence means people are getting more confident in their behaviour on the shop floor because they don't see there as being anything to restrict that behaviour. And it's certainly true that the government is feeling the heat. We've seen that over the past few months in various guises. Firstly, we know that the issue of retail crime has become so toxic. It's now appearing daily in a variety of media, not least, and this surprised me, being a leading issue on Newsnight very recently, which I'm delighted to say Vaughan Allen was one of the leading contributors to this particular piece. We've also seen other things emerge, and I have to say it seems to be a bit hit and miss from the Home Office. They've launched an antisocial behaviour plan, which I'm not sure necessarily deals with some of the root causes. We do know there's a long-standing pledge to replace police numbers back to where they were in 2010, which is good to see. And we had an emergency meeting about this actually during the summer. The most recent round of Safer Streets funding for England and Wales, which seemed to be announced at fairly short notice, and pretty poorly structured as well. And I think that the feeling of those people that attended the meeting seems to be that this round of Safer Streets funding, I think it's round 5, has been a little bit rushed, but it is there for a reason because of some of those challenges. And then a week ago, Home Secretary Suella Braverman demanded that the police should investigate every single crime, with the response from the Police Federation of England and Wales saying that forces are already stretched beyond human limits. So clearly we have a role to play in protecting businesses and communities via the multi-sector sort of partnerships that we can bring to bear. So for the first High Street conversations following the summer break, we're going to ask a number of questions. How bad is the problem on the shop floor? And what are the reasons for those problems? How are retailers responding? And how does the place management industry need to respond? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by bringing in Rachel Phillips. Rachel is a store manager for Boots in Canterbury. So Rachel, do you want to introduce yourself and do you want to give us a flavour of what's happening in Canterbury and some of the challenges you've faced?
Yeah, of course. Good morning, OJ, and good morning, everyone else. I'm Rachel Phillips. I'm an experienced retailer for the past 40 years. I've worked in various industries, from clothing at store level, area, regional, divisional level. And my latest position has been in Boots for coming up to the last 20 years, where I've worked in numerous locations, so Newcastle, Manchester, Birmingham, Leeds, Sheffield, central London, and now Canterbury, where I came to have a bit of a relaxing time before my retirement, but that clearly isn't the case. I've run very, very varied with different size stores, areas and regions. So I've got pretty much a vast experience in retail, and I would like to set off with my current view. Working in West End and through the Olympics, I saw theft at one of its highest, both in Stratford and West End, but not what we're facing today. Today, we are facing a crisis. If we don't address it, we're going to be in a situation where we might not have a high street, and certainly certain retailers. So if I speak for myself, I manage a large store in Canterbury. Our loss, current reality, loss last year was just around £719,000. That was nearly £300,000 worse than the year before. Now that's the annual loss. That's nearly 6% of my sales. And it's 167% worse than last year. My cash loss is minimal, so I know we'll always have an internal issue, but this is external. We face problems every day. We've got smashed windows, we've got bottles being smashed in our faces, my face and a guard's face. We've got patients slashing their wrists in front of us. We've got riots, gangs of youths running through the store, chucking stock at both colleagues and guards. Where historically it has been high premium stock, where you've had obviously your opportunists and your professionals, we're now seeing across the range. So obviously pre-COVID, we didn't have a huge theft issue with our healthcare lines or our baby, but we're certainly seeing that now. And that's obviously a cost of living, we believe, impact. What have we done? So the business has been massively supportive. So we have got body cams, as a lot of Boots stores now have. We carry body cams. We have headsets. We've got more internal panic alarms that link to our CCM room in Nottingham. We've got more CCTV than we've ever had. So we're up to about 87 cameras and we're adding to that. We've got colleagues carrying panic buttons. And we've got the highest paid security guard in the whole of retail, I think, which is me, protecting my team, my patients and my customers. We've done a lot of work locally because of the situation we're in. So we've reduced our trading hours to help us attempt to reduce some of the theft. And we've closed our doors. So we've got 5 doors. So we've had to close 2 of them to allow sort of a one-way in, one-way out system. We're taking stock out of boxes. We've got lockable cabinets. So we're doing everything at retail level to attempt this loss. My concerns are very much around retention. So retail is certainly in Boots, is probably about 90% of my colleagues are female. So there's a big issue in the sense of protection of female and how we protect females in their workplace. My colleagues, probably similar to Marks and Spencer's and a couple of the other brands, are a bit older because we've got lots of medical experience as well as beauty experience. And I also recruit a lot of professionals like my pharmacists, my optometrists, my onecologists, and trying to recruit great professions now in a retail business is quite tough because of what we're facing into. We've got colleagues who won't work late because they're scared to get home, so we're having to pay for taxis to get people home. We've got customers who have informed us they'll get into our stores 9 o'clock in the morning when the school run's done, and they'll be out by sort of 3 o'clock before the school run comes back. We've got increased abuse. We've got ongoing issues with profitability. And I suppose the reality, and I know me, Lisa, and the whole of Canterbury team talk about this regularly, is a store has to be profitable. And the issue we're facing into now is we've got unprofitable stores because of theft. And as a retailer, my job is to make a profitable store, to retain my 120 colleagues in store with a livelihood and a job. And that really concerns me. The amount of theft we're facing into is making the store unprofitable. I suppose the other concerns for me around the abuse, the antisocial behaviour is certainly in Canterbury, we've got a lot of students here who travel in, who pay a lot of money to come to Canterbury universities. When we're seeing students being attacked on by the locals, where we're having to step in and support. We've got obviously the media issue with TikTok. Who can get the biggest theft out of Boots today? You're up against it from every which way. So for us, OJ, it's the worst I've ever seen it in 40 years. It is tangible now on the high street. You can feel how bad it is out there. And for us, we really need to think about how we work collectively to make sure we've got key retailers who are first point of call. If you can't get to a doctor, you can't get to a hospital, we are the third point of call for health. So we are a key retailer and worked tirelessly through COVID to make sure we supported our communities. But the reality is it's getting harder. So for me personally, with obviously what I've shared so far, it's an ongoing issue and I really can't see how it's going to stop unless we do something fundamentally different.
That's it's really troubling, really disturbing. I think first and probably most importantly is to just touch upon which one of the key points you brought up, the human cost of all of this. You sign up to work for the police or the military, you expect a level of risk. Some of the things you've just described, your staff going through on the shop floor, I just can't imagine many people really having any comprehension that they're the types of things they will face on a day-to-day basis. When joining a retailer, it seems like it's a real challenge, and I'm guessing there must be lots of difficulties for you in terms of retaining staff. Is recruitment actually a problem? Have these problems fed through to people who would have otherwise thought about joining the retail sector and now decide actually I'll go work somewhere else?
Absolutely, absolutely, both professionally and my colleagues in retail and pharmacy. Yeah.
Yeah, because obviously what makes this issue worse is that we are currently going through a labour shortage. And the last time I looked at the stats, I think retail was actually the top industry that had seen the biggest loss of staff, even ahead of hospitality, which we know had been significantly hit. And I think when you add to all the other things going on in society, when you add the problem of crime on the shop floor, I can absolutely understand why. That must be a real challenge. And I think moving on from that as well, do you think there are, you described the issue of having lots of doorways which you're now having to start to close off just to better monitor and get a grip of foot flow throughout the store. And I know for years we've been going through a process of trying to open shops up, make them more attractive, make them easier to navigate around. And it feels like we're having to start to backtrack around that because of the issues around crime. And I guess one of the biggest examples I can think of is things like self-service checkouts, which were there to increase convenience for shoppers, which now in this age of so much shop theft probably make things more difficult for retailers. Do you feel like there's almost a reversal possibly, or could be a reversal in terms of some of the trends we've seen in shop design because of crime?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, managers are being given, rightly so, the autonomy to make the right decisions for the safety of their team and their colleagues. So for me, that decision was a no-brainer, in the sense of, because of I mean, Lisa knows the store very well, because of the foot flow and how it runs within Canterbury. That was a big issue for us. I think my view, I mean, if I go back to my days in Eldon Square and Topshop many moons ago, and my days in Manchester, it's very much now around giving people the confidence on how we aren't guards, we're not trained in guards, but when we recruit colleagues now, we're having to give them that extra training around their self-protection, their self-awareness, how to step away, how to address that abuse, which is really upsetting. When somebody's swearing at you, you don't come into work to be sworn at. When somebody's shouting at you, and that's not a nice environment to be in. You wouldn't tolerate that at home, so why are we having to tolerate that at work? And it feels now as though that's the norm, and that's what's more upsetting, that behaviour is acceptable.
Yeah, that's a real challenge. And I know in a conversation we had before the summer, we had Layla at the Association of Independent Multiple Pharmacies. And in a way, it was a similar discussion to this, in that we've got a group of retailers there who, it's not just discretionary shopping they're offering. They're a key part of supporting people in terms of their health on the high street. And yet some of the pressures they are under means there's lots of pharmacies closing as a result. And I feel like it doesn't feel like a retailer like Boots, it's a similar position. You're not just any other retailer, it's a key service for local communities, which we should be doing everything we can to support. Is that the feeling?
I think the underlying feeling for me would be more about every store has to be profitable, because why would you not have a profitable store? Now, if you've got stores out there that are obviously in a tough environment and they're losing thousands and thousands of pounds through theft, which they can't stop, then of course a business is going to look at how profitable is a store. And that's going to be any business. Boots has recently announced that we are closing some stores where they've got stores in close proximity. Now, that down to profitability? I believe it is, because we need profitable stores out there. But the reality is, where you've got those tough environments, why would you, if you haven't to face into that every day, why would you have a store in that location? Yeah.
Yeah, right. So we've got bids and councils and a few people in between on the call. So my final question to you, Rachel, is if there were 1, 2, maybe 3 things you were mostly important, and I'm sure you've already had this conversation with Lisa, but for everybody else, what are possibly the 2 or 3 things we should be doing on behalf of retailers like Boots that you would actually find most helpful in relation to retail crime?
Well, firstly, thank you for this conversation, because showing that you care is immensely important to us as retailers, that we aren't just alone. So firstly, can I just say thank you for showing some care and listening and taking the opportunity to understand what we are facing. So that'd be the first thing. Showing your retailers that you do care and there's actively something going on to try and work this through with them is really, really important, because it can feel quite alone when you're out there on the high street. It's got to be joined up for me. So it's got to start with opportunists. So the young kid coming in at 8 o'clock in the morning to Nicky's sandwich, we've got to nip it in the bud there, because that's then where they get away with that element. Then we start getting abuse. Then we get the high theft of the premium. So how do we go back to education somehow and schools to work with them in the sense of that link between schools into stores, into a behaviour that's unacceptable? The police, I know, are up against it, but their presence is so important. It's so important, not only for the individual that might be about to create a crime, but for us as individuals working in that environment, to be able to call on if needed, because it does feel very alone out there. So I'd say care, visibility, and how do we get the root cause is really important, and how do we stop it at that root cause, with the understanding of you might be stealing a sandwich and it might only be £1.50 or £1.99, but multiply that by X amount, and your mum, who is actually working in Sainsbury's, but you're nicking from Boots, is potentially going to be out of a job, because it's going to hit the whole sector. And that's, I think, where we've got the education. We've got to do a bit of education around the impact, because I don't think people understand the impact of their actions, that people will lose jobs and businesses will close.
Yeah, that all makes sense. Rachel, that's brilliant. Please do stick around if you can for the rest of the conversation, because I'm sure there'll be lots of questions flying back and forth following the next 2 speakers. So next, what I want to do is I want to introduce Hasnall Camden Town Unlimited, a bid that's always done some fantastic work around safety and security. So I was going to bring you in to talk about some of the work you've been doing over the past year.
Yep. Can you hear me, everyone? Perfect. We'll try to share my screen, fingers crossed, no technical difficulties.
Yeah, good luck.
Yeah.
I'll be disappointed if you make it work first time and make me look back. Come on, mate.
How's it looking?
It looks, unfortunately, it looks good. You just need to go to gallery view.
That's how you do it, OJ.
Yeah.
I've been shamed. I've been shamed.
Oh, it's not working.
Oh, thank goodness for that.
We spoke too soon.
That's it. That's right.
Slide.
And then, yeah, go to gallery view. So if you, yeah, that's it. Press present.
Where is it?
Move your cursor to the right.
Present.
Yeah. Play from the beginning.
That's not the beginning.
Oh, that's not the beginning. Right. Press on your keyboard. Can you press P?
Oh, it's because you need to move the cursor up to the top. You've highlighted that's it.
Yeah. And then
Yeah, but you've done that, haven't you?
yeah.
Oh.
There you go. Technical difficulties all round.
Yeah, I feel much better
Yeah.
now. So go into presentation mode again.
Yep.
And then if you're in presentation mode, if it's starting halfway through, try pressing P on your
Oh.
keyboard and move it. Oh, there we go.
There you go.
Somehow.
I feel better now. I feel like I've regained a little bit of credibility again.
Yeah. So just in case anyone doesn't know me, as Ojo was saying, I work for Camden Town Bid. I've been with the bid for 11 years, and to give you some context, I want to go through the journey of how we've responded to various crime issues, and then obviously we'll come back to where we are at right now. So the foundation of our bid has always been tackling crime. Our reputation means nothing. Our street improvements, our events, our sort of creativity, all of that, everything that we do means nothing if there's crime and everyone's scared to visit the high street and do anything on the high street. So if people are intimidated to shop, if people are intimidated to enjoy themselves on the high street, one of the things we have an issue with is drug dealers using their tables and chairs outside restaurants and cafes to basically loiter. And that's one of the things we're trying to tackle. But again, that goes back to the reputation. If people don't feel comfortable to use those tables and chairs, then they're not even going to enter the premises because they don't feel as though it's inviting for them. So one of the first things we did back in 2006 when we first incorporated was put out, which was quite controversial. Remember, this is about 17, 18 years ago. We spent 80% of our bid levy. That was the first thing that we did to tackle all the drug dealers. And that was quite taboo because the police, private security was never a thing on the high street anywhere. It was like quite controversial. The police were like flabbergasted that we would even dare to put private security on the high street patrolling with high visits and stuff. In store, yes, but on the high street it was quite controversial. But that allowed us to then get a dedicated Camden Town tasking team, and from that sort of push we were able to prove, look, you can do something about this, and there is a resource needed in Camden Town dedicated to basically tackle the issues in our area. So that gave us the Camden Town tasking team. Problem is, when crime starts going down, you start losing people again. So what happened is we then, in 2018, when crime started getting really bad, we moved to a hybrid model because coppers cost quite a lot. But because the legislation changed, we were able to pay for coppers. We thought, let's try it out. We paid for 2 coppers and had 6 community wardens or private security to deal with the drug dealers and the antisocial behavior. And again, we went back to spending almost 80%, 70% of our bid levy. So you can see how we had to go back to the start all over again, basically, because crime started going out of hand. So we went and flexed the other way again. We started focusing on the most serious issues, which was crime at the time, and went for a hybrid model. Then one of the things we learned was police are quite hard to task because they don't work for you and they get taken away constantly. So if anyone is thinking of paying for police, then I would just say it's tricky. You can't task them. They can be taken away for things like carnival. They can be taken away for things like terrorism and stuff like that. So even though your bid members might say, I want a copper, I want someone that can actually do something, you can always explain to them, look, Camden Town or other bids have had the experience where it's quite difficult managing, keeping them on site and telling them what to do, basically. So they will do the shift patterns that you tell them to do, but making sure that the resource is always there and where they are is quite difficult. So what we've come to now, because of issues around getting businesses to report crime, getting using platforms like Disc, we've had an issue around WhatsApp, and obviously the data and GDPR issues around using WhatsApp, which would have been so much more convenient. We ended up landing on this concept of a weekly operational meeting, and at the crux of it, it's where the police attend and everyone, businesses, retail, office, the council, ourselves, we all report crime to the police. So there's no GDPR issues because anyone can report crime, anyone can share images, anyone can tell the police what the issues are. So that works around the GDPR issue, and we all email the police faces from our CCTV and nicknames. So we can't use people's real names because obviously there's other people in the room and stuff. But what we can do is share faces to say, yep, they're people that we're having issues with. And what we do is we create like a top 10 wanted list or hit list. And the objective is we focus on the one individual that's doing the most shopping theft, the one individual selling the most drugs or being the most antisocial, the one individual, and we work down that list. And the idea is all of these individuals are issued with community protection notices. And as we all know the nicknames, and as over time, as we know who the main culprits are and who's the number one person on our list or number 2 or 3 person on our list, whenever they do anything, everyone reports them at operational meeting, shares the image of the individual doing shop theft. So like a drug dealer, for example, might be selling drugs on the high street, but then they're going to Pret and pick up some free lunch. They don't pay for the sandwich, they don't pay for the food, or they might go into Greg's and grab something from Greg's. So that's like 3 points of data that we can then share with the police to say, here you go, here's a case file on this individual that you can start building. This individual nicknamed, for example, Hatman. Hatman is a known drug dealer. We have evidence of him drug dealing. We also have evidence of him shoplifting on the high street. He's a nuisance on the community. So we eventually escalate to the point where the individual is issued with the CPN, then banned from the area. And eventually, as they breach their CPNs, they can basically get prosecuted further and further. So the idea is we all get to know who the high-level issue individuals are. We work down that list, and we must have issued at least 75 CPNs by now. And so many people have, along that journey, been put into prison for various different types of crime, usually not theft, but they get processed. And what happens is a lot of the shoplifters, they don't come back because they're like, it's not worth it. So any one of our businesses that are part of the CBAC radio scheme, and they have the stickers on the front and they have the warden stickers on the front, the shoplifters know, if I go in here and hit them, there's going to be a instant security response. CCTV is going to start tracking me on the high street. So for example, someone shoplifts in M&S, they pick up loads of nice steaks to sell on the expensive stuff, or maybe bottles of wine. They try to run out with it. As they run out with it, the shop has let CCTV know via our radio network. Then CCTV tells our wardens where they are and the police where they are. And then in this case, for example, they went down the canal. They thought they were nice and safe, but because CCTV directed the police and the wardens to that individual, we were able to then apprehend that individual and get them picked up, basically just about half a mile down the road. So even though they thought they got away with it, they got picked up. So one of the key things that we do in our operational meetings is we find out what all the resources of all the organizations, security, who's got security on when the police shift pattern is, so we'll know if the police aren't on shift, then we need to be a bit more on the ball, and what time the wardens are on, what all the resources are in the town center, so that we can all be prepared and say, okay, I've got this many security on this time, who's in, who's up to what, and then we can coordinate resources. And off the back of that, we're also able to then coordinate operations. So we've kind of become like a hub because of all the intelligence that we've pumped into the police. The police really like us because we've been able to get so many CPNs, get so many prosecutions, get so many police love actual evidence that can get prosecutions. So the quality of our evidence effectively is really high. And the interesting thing is we don't upload it onto disk. We don't upload it onto the Met website, because if you upload it onto the Met website, it gets lost into the matrix, if you know what I mean. But when we email this to our local copper, who then sees those faces on the high street, all of the coppers are always emailing me. Apologies, I just got to grab this call, sorry.
Well, it's on the call. I can't see Haz on screen, so he might be on the call. Does anybody have any questions or comments at this stage?
I've got a list of questions, Audio, but I think I'll leave them to the end.
Okay. Sorry, I'm back again.
Okay, cool. Carry on.
Sorry, and what the value of providing that intelligence to people that can action it there and then is really powerful, because the police really appreciate it. They're like, thanks to your, and they'll give us feedback always. They're like, thanks to your picture of a car related to drug dealing, we picked you up in another borough, because he goes onto the police system. We picked you up in another borough with 50 bags of A-class drugs and several £1,000 worth of weed in the vehicle. And they would never have picked that up without our guys or one of the shop retailers issuing that intelligence. So the value of our intelligence, sharing it directly with our local sergeant, directly with our local Met team, is invaluable to them. And every single time we get that churn of new police officers, they then get added onto that, and then their colleagues tell them, you need to be on this, because they give us quality information. They give us names, faces, and behaviors, patterns, all of that. Basically, it's like a cheat sheet for them. So even though they might be fresh on the beat, they look at this and think, wow, this is really good information for us to use, and then they just go off the back of that. It's like catching up to things really quickly, including shoplifters. Sorry, my screen's now not. Went too fast. So one of the things we like to do is use each partner's powers. So we provide private sniffer dogs so that the police and our wardens can then walk up and down the high street with the private sniffer dog. The sniffer dog susses out if someone's got drugs on them, and then the police say, we have warrant to believe that you've got something in your possession, so we will now conduct a search. And then they do the search, and then they find drugs on them. So that's one example of how the private sector, as a private sector, we partner up with the police to basically do more efficient stop and searches. And another thing we like to do is use the powers of trading standards and the brands to hit shops selling fake goods, because they can search a premises where they believe they're selling fake goods. The police would have to have a warrant otherwise. And then we bring in sniffer dogs so they can smell for drugs in the premises, because we usually try to target both at the same time. And then our wardens will provide that street presence. But it's kind of collaborating and using each other's legal powers to be able to basically get more of an efficient return. And that's one of the things we like to do. Who's in the area? How can we coordinate operations? How can we use each other's powers and resources more efficiently? But that's it. Questions?
That's really useful. I think I've not actually considered before the potential in terms of understanding the almost the movements after somebody's committed a theft, so you can understand behaviors and bring that intelligence together, because ultimately that is really important. That is really important. I do know that I think there are question marks around what information you're actually allowed to share, and whether it's compliant with regards to GD. Is that right, Andrew Sharman? Andrew, are you around? I don't know if Andrew can come on.
As far as we've been informed by the Met and our guidance, any one business or individual is allowed to report crime to the police. So, but it's just that we're doing it in a group setting, if you know what I mean. It's like a community event where everyone is sitting there and we all basically report crime and share images of the individuals to the police effectively. But we're not using any personal identifying details other than an image. And the image isn't shared in between each organization, it's shared directly with the Met team.
Okay, that makes more sense. And I'm not an expert on this.
Yeah.
But my understanding would be sharing it with the police is fine.
Yes.
Not to report the crime. Andrew's microphone won't open. So Andrew, if there's any comments you want to put in the chat box, fine, we'll come back to it. Does anybody have any questions or comments for Haz before I bring Stephen in from Solihull?
OG, just Bridget from Whitechapel. I've got a similar problem that Hassan has identified. And it's the same thing. I wanted to commit approximately 50% of my budget to safety and security, because my problem is exactly the same with the street dealing, the drug dealers, and the alcohol abuse, even though we've got a public space protection order in place and enforcement. But as you said, we found success with working together with the police, but I like what you're doing. So I'll see if I can show what you're doing to my team in Tower Hamlets and see if we can get something similar, because at least you've got the evidence to back up what you're doing that actually works. We've had one little success recently where we got a bench removed, but that was because we spent 1 week quarreling with TFL about moving this bench that was harboring drug dealers, drug takers, and alcohol people who were actually using it as base camp to rob the shops. So because TFL is also part of the dynamic, it also makes things a little bit complicated. But thank you for this. This is useful. Thank you.
Well, can I then quickly bring in Cara and Lisa, and I'll come to Andrew as well, and then we're going to move on to Stephen. So, Cara, do you want to go first?
Lovely. I do apologise for having some renovations done. So if you hear any drilling in the background, it is definitely me. Okay. Just want to say, fabulous model. We are doing something similar in Watford, albeit on a small scale. I did put a question in the chat for you, but I was wondering if I might be able to catch up with you separately after this session. I think actually we bumped into each other at the ATCM conference recently, the summer school. But yeah, I've got a couple of questions that I think might relate to Watford. We're the same as everybody else, you know, massive crime in our antisocial behaviour. We've got actually I guess it's between 2 and 4 weeks monthly forum that we're doing. It's particularly looking at ASB. And what we're seeing is that where we target one area and we move the ASB behaviour from that area, it then starts off somewhere else. And actually we had a lot of problems. It was just on the outskirts of Watford Town Centre, and it's now really, there's prolific offenders, and they're getting so bold now. They're literally going in broad daylight in a cafe bar, walking behind the counter and just robbing the alcohol off the shelf. So that the change in how brazen they're becoming is just, it's quite eye-opening. But we've only got one bid ranger at the moment. He is an ex-PCSO, and we're looking at potentially additional security. My main question is that have you found by having because that's a lot, that has actually caused people to become unnerved in the same way when you're at the airport and you see so many security, you get that you don't necessarily feel safe, do you? You feel like, oh my gosh, is this a bad place to come because there's so much security?
So apologies, I should have put in another slide to say that COVID hit our finances quite hard. And then in London, I can imagine yourselves too, but in central London, our rates, business rates revaluation meant that our income dropped further. So we've actually gone from a 6-person team since 2020 to a 2-person team. So we only have 2 wardens now that we have paid for the last 3 years, and that have quite successfully. That's why we have to get a lot more clever with. Before it was more like bash, bash, bash. Now we have to get a lot more streamlined and strategic and think, okay, that's where the weekly operational meeting came in, because we found monthly was too infrequent, and there was always new faces and the movement was too quick. So a prime example would be the dealers first used to carry the drugs, then they put the drugs on the backs of bags on people on bicycles, then they start putting them in trees, and these sorts of change of behavior was really quick, and a month by month basis is too slow. Whereas we found a weekly meeting, it's frequent enough to catch those movements and new faces, but not too frequent that people don't bother attending. And to answer one of the questions someone else asked, we don't use any official channels to report this intelligence and crime. We literally just email simple face, incident, and a few details basically of that individual to the police to say, hey, this is nickname X person, and this is more information towards that individual's case basically for a CPN. That's all the retailer does basically. But a lot of retailers don't have that capacity. So what we do is our warden will go there, get a video of the individual, and then we streamline that process. We basically become the conduit for reporting all crime in Camden Town. So if retailers don't have that capacity, they'll be like, oh, that person's in the shop, can you come and grab an image of them? Our wardens will go to the shop, grab an image of them, even though they might not be shoplifting at that moment, but as a reference for that individual's face in reference to a crime committed earlier or potentially in the future. So we grab that image. So that way, all crime reporting is funneled through us. If retailers can, great, it adds layers. But if not, our wardens, at the moment we only got one warden, but our warden or wardens always go around basically getting images on behalf from CCTV if they allow it. So we can get body cam the footage off someone's CCTV, but some people aren't allowed to do that. So we would then wait for that individual to reappear and then capture that individual image to add more evidence onto that individual for CPNs. So our resource is very thin now, and we're still quite effective. We're still very effective because we've tweaked how we do things.
Yeah, no, I think we're going to have to go in heavy because maybe Camden's done so good they're all coming to Watford. Because we are seeing a lot of new faces, and they are known in the London area. Obviously, being so close to London, so we're seeing a lot of newbies pop up and sort of wondering where they're coming from. But which is why I think we're going to have to do a big approach. And our recent survey, crime and safety, is now our top priority, so, which is a shame.
Certainly cause for some form of regional coordination then as well, where you have issues of displacement of a problem. Lisa, can I bring you in? And Andrew Sharman, I did promise I'd bring you in now. Can I bring you in after Stephen's spoken? Because I think we will need to have that discussion around the sharing of data. And we should probably have that after both the bids have spoken. So Lisa, can I bring you in first?
It's just a quick one in the sense that we could talk about this all day, but Hassanal, what struck me in terms of what you were saying was the maturity of partnership and the kind of level of trust you've got with different groups, in particular the police. So are the council involved at all in terms of their enforcement? Okay, and then how long do you think it took for that partnership to reach this stage of maturity that you could have this kind of meeting, or any other insights?
So I think the council are one of the foundations of these operational meetings. They every week they send the Camden Town market representative teams, market representative. They'll send a representative for their version of private security on the high street. They send a representative for licensing. So they'll send a representative for all of the departments, because what we find is we shared this intelligence at a strategic level with council officers, and they had no idea all of this was going on the high street. Then as soon as they saw what was going on and they read through the manuscripts, they're like, what the hell? A stabbing happened here, knives were pulled out here, gang fight happened there, someone got run over, shooting happened here. They're like, it doesn't get on the news, so they don't hear about it, and they're not on the high street to know what's going on. So when we started sharing these manuscripts with them, council officers were shocked. So then they made it a requirement for different departments to attend these operations meetings, and then the police, then also the senior police made it a requirement for officers to always be present at the meetings, because the quality of our intelligence and just the variety and the severity of it alarmed a lot of strategic individuals within the police department and the council, and they saw the value of having representation at the operational meeting as a requirement every week. And once we had that in place, all the retailers were really happy to attend, because they were like, okay, all the security heads were happy to attend, because they're like, oh, the council's there and the police are there, so let's all start reporting. So it was a bit chicken and egg, but I would say it took about a year or two. So it did take a bit of time to build up the traction and for us to build the value. But one of the key things is reinforcing that value, because people always change. And whether that's in the Met Police or whether that's in retailers and security, we have to represent that value and that value proposition to all the different stakeholders. So as we're always hot on it. As soon as someone's on the way out, we always ask everyone, if anyone's moving on, let us know who your new incumbent person is, whoever's taking over. And then they do like a briefing to that new person to say, hey, you need to really be in on this, because it really helps our retail shop or premises. Or if it's council officers, then they'll be briefed, and police likewise. So we always tell everyone, can you brief whoever's coming in and let us know who's coming in to replace you?
That's really useful. Karen, I can see you've got your hands up. What I'm going to do is I'm going to bring Stephen in first, just because I know we're into the final half hour, and then I'm going to bring you back in at the end, along with Andrew Sharman as well. So Hasan, that's great. I think one of the things I picked up from that as well is I like your targeting of the people who are the most frequent offenders, because I've seen work of one particular town, this is going back years, around ASB where they'd provided, it was all anonymous, but in terms of all the incidents, hundreds of incidents that had happened around ASB, actually, when you took away the top 5 offenders, you took them out of the equation, the most frequent offenders, actually it removes about 80 to 90% of all that's happening, because some of the most frequent offenders, it's so repetitive from them that they are by far the lion's share of the problem. So that targeting, I think, is really, rather than going for everyone, targeting the most frequent offenders, I think, is useful when you haven't got all the resources you'd like.
And the police really like that way of dealing with it, because they're like, okay, I just got to focus on one person for shop theft, and I got to focus only on one person for drug dealing, one at a time. We really found that they like that. If you've got, like, we've got 3 categories: antisocial behavior, drug dealing, and shop theft. We've got 3 categories, and we just say these are the 3 people we're after for those 3 categories. Once we've issued CPNs on them, we reinforce those CPNs, but then we move on to the next person.
Yeah, that's great. That's a really nice way of working. Stephen, Solihull, can I bring you in? I know we've had a discussion or two about DISC in the chat box, and I believe Solihull Bid is extremely good at using the system. So can we bring you in and hear a little bit more?
Yeah, can you all see that?
And you're going to make myself and Hasnell look really bad by getting that up first.
I've done very basic, and I think I've only got 2 slides. So yeah, I've tried to mitigate any technical issues.
Well done.
So I'm Stephen Coney. I'm PR manager for Solihull Bid. So Solihull Bid has been around since 2010. I've worked for the Bid for over 5 years now. So if you don't know Solihull, we're a sort of medium-sized town just outside Birmingham. A lot of people think it's part of Birmingham, but the locals would strongly disagree with that. So we have our own council, Metropolitan Borough Council, so we're not under Birmingham, so we are our separate own town. In terms of the Bid area, we're quite a mix of use, so we've got about 40% retail, 40% professional services and office-based businesses, and around 15 to 20% of the rest of it is hospitality. So it's quite a rich mix of businesses in our town centre. And I think it's important to realise when we talk about retail crime or crime generally, when it comes to businesses, is that retail crime impacts every type of business. Obviously, it's directly impacting the retail sector, but that also has a knock-on effect for the professional services. Their staff are coming out on their lunch breaks, spending in those businesses. If they see that the experience is not an enjoyable one, it's not a safe one, then they're going to stop spending in those businesses. We're trying more and more to get our big office-based businesses to bring their staff more into our offices more regularly since COVID. And one of the pulls for that is that they've got a nice and welcoming town centre to come into on their lunch break, when they're walking to work, when they're leaving work. If that experience is a bad one, then those staff are not going to want to come into the town centre, and that's going to take more people and more spend out of the town centre. So, retail crime is huge for everyone, and I think it does have a big impact on every single aspect of business, and not just retail. So in terms of what we provide, our spend is around 15 to 20% of our sort of yearly income goes out onto our security projects. Street wardens, I know a lot of bids do provide security. So we have 7-day-a-week coverage for street wardens. So for 5 of those days, we have 2, and for 2 of the days, a Sunday and a Monday, we have 1. So it's not a huge provision, but in terms of budgets, that's what we can really stretch to. When we survey businesses, like every bid does, security is the top thing. As I said, not even just for retail, for your offices, for your hospitality, they see the security of Solihull as such a huge thing. In terms of geographically, we have a few big cities near us. Obviously, we have Birmingham, we have Coventry, and we have a few sort of similar sized towns like Leamington and Stratford. So there's lots of competition for us locally. So we need to make sure that Solihull is an enjoyable place to come and shop and to come and visit, because that's part of the USP of Solihull as a town, is that it's a more enjoyable and more welcoming place to come than maybe your Birminghams and your Coventrys. So if we let that slip, then footfall and business is going to deteriorate because of that. Another thing that we do, like a lot of kids do, is the sort of free crime reporting. So we use DISC as well. I will say that there are others available, but DISC is the one that we use, and that's been an invaluable sort of thing for us. We obviously fund it, and the businesses don't have to pay. We currently have over 125 of our businesses on there using it regularly. So that's an invaluable thing for us. That gives us the way to go to the police, to go to the council, and really give them stats that back up what we're all seeing in town centres. As I'm sure a lot of people on this call will know, that when you're talking to police and councils, if you don't have those cold hard stats, they don't really want to hear about anecdotal. If they haven't got stats, then it almost didn't happen. So it's really important from our point of view to have those stats. And we can see that since January, our street wardens alone have recovered over £75,000 worth of stock and returned it to the stores. And then obviously there's a lot more than that that's unfortunately not been recovered. So it's a growing issue. Solihull is seen as quite an affluent town, but every single town in the country will have these issues, and they are growing, unfortunately, which is why we've had to step up our street wardens. We didn't used to do 7 days, we used to do 5 days. We've increased that, and we probably would like to increase it even more, but in terms of budgets, this is what we can stretch to, and it's about leveraging partnerships and other things to get more value out of what you're able to provide to the businesses. Training is something that our businesses really appreciate from us. Stock loss prevention, just the really basics. As I think OJ alluded to, recruitment is difficult, very difficult now for retail. Getting people in that have got experience is tough. And even if you do, the numbers of staff in shops has dwindled. So it's that they need all the help they can get. So stock loss prevention training is something that we do, and other things like we do group first aid training, and we do a lot of counter-terrorism training as well, alongside the police. So that's something that we've started to focus more on as well. And obviously when we talk about things like Martin's Law that will be coming in, that's something that we'll focus on as well, for our local business community. For visitors, we've partnered with Age UK, the charity, to set up a safe space for vulnerable visitors. So I know that's not technically crime, but it's more sort of the safety and security of the town centre, and again, making it an enjoyable place to come and visit. We work very closely with our local council when it comes to rough sleeping and begging. So we have a direct line to the leader of the council, as well as sort of the person who leads on the rough sleeping aspect. So we don't tend to have much of an issue. Since COVID, we haven't. Before COVID, there was quite a big issue with rough sleeping and begging. Fortunately, we've got our sort of fingers on the pulse now. We really have been on top of that issue. So since then, we haven't really had many issues, but it's a case of getting those partnerships in place, really getting them embedded. And it does take time. It takes a lot of hard work, but in the end, you really do see the results, and businesses that you work with will also see those results. And then talking about ASB, that's in terms of Solihull, our two big things are shoplifting and ASB. We don't tend to get much issues around things like drugs and things like that, but it's your shoplifting and your ASB, especially with the younger people. Solihull Town Centre has two quite large colleges on sort of the edge of the town centre, as well as a lot of schools in the local vicinity, where obviously children will be coming into the town centre to get buses or just to visit the town centre before and after they go to school. So we've worked quite closely with police and also directly with those education providers to try and crack down on ASB. So we've got them involved in our DISC system. We've signed a data sharing agreement with the police, which then they get local schools and colleges to sign up to as well. So they can see specific galleries for them, which are young people that have been involved in ASB as well as shoplifting. And then they go to their school liaison officer if they recognise one of their students, and that's how then we can try and crack down on that issue. We found from young people especially that the respect for our street wardens and especially, and even police, there isn't that respect and fear almost there anymore. But we've found that sort of telling them that we're going to be telling their colleges, especially because they're choosing to go to college, and that they will, you know, be dealt with accordingly. That's really had a big impact, and we've seen ASB reports from our side come down 40% over the last 6 months since we really started working closely with our local education providers. So that's something that we've really tried to you know, really crack down on. And I think others have alluded to it as well. I think partnerships are the bedrock of anything that you do, and especially from a bid perspective, you have to have those partnerships. The police have taken a bit of a battering in recent years, but locally here it has improved drastically over the last 12 months. We have our own dedicated Solihull Town Centre neighbourhood team now, which we work you know, really closely with. A bit like Camden, we have you know, we have regular meetings, and we have links, you know, from your PCSOs all the way up to your sort of chief inspector. We're having regular meetings with all of those levels of the police. We have regular meetings with police, which also include you know, key stakeholders, so our shopping centre managers and our really big store managers. They're involved in those to report any sort of overriding issues. It's about those partnerships. The council, as I mentioned, about sort of rough sleeping and homelessness, we work really closely with them, and we also work closely with them and the police when it comes to sort of community protection notices, CPWs. We've really used those a lot more. In past years, they were incredibly difficult to get through, very rarely used, but we're using those a lot now for our regular offenders, especially when it comes down to sort of like begging and things like that in ASB. So that's been used really effectively over the past sort of 6 months. It's really deterred those individuals from coming to Solihull. And the only negative thing the police say to us is that we've been able to move issues out of Solihull Town Centre, which have then maybe gone to bordering areas, which is obviously, you know, you can't solve all the issues. But from a Solihull Town Centre perspective, from a bid who are working for our businesses, they see that the issues have alleviated, and you know, we feel like we've done our job, and we've really helped sort of improve the experience of coming to you know, Solihull Town Centre. The police do use our DISC system. I know a lot of police services don't, but we've managed to get our police on there, especially the PCSOs. They regularly check DISC. We find that a lot of things on DISC that are sort of petty crime don't get reported to police. As much as we like to tell businesses that they need to report things to police, they don't always do that. So it gives the police you know, a better overall view of what really is happening on the town centre. And it's about getting those relationships. I think Camden sort of alluded that if things get sent to, you know, through the portals at police, it probably doesn't even go local. It goes in our experience, it would go to somewhere in Birmingham, it would go to the main police headquarters. It's about using those you really need those local partnerships and local relationships. And that's what you really need to try and get in place, because that's what will really make the big difference. If you've got those local people that really buy in to what you want to do, neighbourhood police, obviously, because they're stationed in your area, they really, you know, we've blessed really with a really good neighbourhood police team here in Solihull, and they really do care. And they say that they can see we care. The council are really buying into that as well. So it's about just getting those partnerships in place. It does take, you know, it's not an overnight thing. It can take years sometimes to really get that partnership, you know, really strong. It's probably the strongest we've had it ever now here in Solihull. So that's you know, it's a real positive thing for us. But it does take time and effort. But you will really see the benefits, and your businesses will as well. Not so much sort of crime, but when we work very closely as well with the fire service and the ambulance service, in terms of sort of helping to fund and place new things like defibrillators, bleed kits, and we also share a lot of things from the fire service in terms of fire safety to our businesses. We work with ATCM, as I mentioned earlier, in terms of setting up safe spaces for vulnerable people. Change into Action is an alternative giving scheme that we at Solihull Bid helped sort of launch, and we help support now for people that are at risk of homelessness. So we're the single biggest sort of raiser of funds for that in Solihull. So we do a Christmas jog every year where people dress up as Santa, and that raises thousands of pounds for that cause. So that helps us when we talk to the police about, you know, cracking down on things like begging and homelessness, and helping those people back into society. You know, we're not just saying that. We do our bit as well, and we help raise the funds that are going to help them change their lives for the good as well. And it's about looking at it as an overall, as I started this presentation, it's about looking at it as it's a whole town centre or city centre or wherever you are. It's the whole picture. Obviously, retail crime is going to impact the retailers the most, but it's going to impact all of your businesses. It's going to impact your places. It's going to stop people from coming to your place, and that's going to be a negative thing for every single business, for every single placemaker in your area. So this is an issue that's it's going to only increase. So it's if you're not already focusing on this, which I'm assuming most people are, it's something that really it should be at the top of your agenda, really, because it's something that we can't let get much worse, because it will, unless we step in and really try and work collaboratively with the other organisations in your area to really help the situation. I think that's overall. OJ, sort of, there's plenty of other stuff I could mention, but in terms of from a retail crime perspective and things we can do to help support that, I think that's probably most of the stuff that we do here in Solihull.
That's great. That's so much useful information in that. I think really lots of golden nuggets. Again, that need for those local partnerships, which is critical. The importance of reporting as well, because even if and I heard this at the conference a couple of days ago, even if reporting a crime doesn't necessarily immediately lead to the action we'd like to see in terms of apprehending the perpetrator, if it's reported and the stats are there, you collect those stats, then ultimately police forces can make a decision on where they are going to dedicate limited resources to based on some of those stats they have available. So the anecdotal stuff, not as important. Those statistics, really important. So the importance of reporting, whether there's direct action immediately in the short term or not, is critical. That's really useful. Firstly, Karen, I promised I'd bring you in, so I'm going to bring you in now, and then Andrew Sharman, I'm going to come to you as well.
Okay, thanks, OJ. First of all, can I just say the anecdotal stuff in a lot of cases can be very valuable in a police prosecution. When does information become intelligence? Now, if they can place somebody at a certain place at a certain time, it might not feel as if it's important at the beginning, but it's certainly important when they're trying to gather information. Now, when I worked for Sainsbury's, just to give everybody a background, I was a Sainsbury's employee before I joined Town Centre Management Scheme. And the first thing I had to deal with when I joined the scheme, a Town Centre Management Scheme, was looking at a retail crime initiative. And I set up the Middlesbrough Against Store Crime Group. And what we used to do there was we had little notepads printed for our security guards. And there were literally ticky box things. This guy, he was in my shop at this time doing this behaviour, right? And they used to keep a log of what was going on. The police used to take that and use and input that as information that actually went to help a lot of cases. Nowadays, you could probably do that on an app. You know, we didn't even have mobile phones in those days, so it was a completely different thing. We also had the usual shop watch scheme, right, that was going on. And the big thing that we did, and I haven't heard anybody mention this, so I don't know whether it's still possible to do it, is we had a number of security guards that we had in our town centre that were the good ones. There was like half a dozen that were brilliant, and they were the ones that everybody else was learning from, really. We encouraged those security guards to become police specials. And we paid them, Sainsbury's paid them overtime to do that training because it made them better on statements and dealing with stuff during the week when they were doing their normal jobs, as well as having this as an enhancement. And that made a massive difference as well. The other thing we actually had was, and I'll put it here, see the CCTV bit. I've always been a little bit wary about CCTV stuff, because does CCTV in an area make me feel safe, or does it make me feel as if there's been a problem there before, so I'm unsafe? So it has this kind of balance on the two things that are going on as well. So I think we need to be really careful. I think it's really disappointing that 25 years later from when I did it, it's still the same problem. And the biggest thing we've got to stop people doing is calling it shoplifting. It's theft, and it is shop theft, and it creates, you know, massive losses for companies, which results in job losses, lack of development, store closures. It's important. And finally, the last thing I did do was a school program. I got a local film company to film something through the eyes of a child, of what happens to them when they get apprehended in a shop, and what happens to them when they get taken to the police station, what happens to them when the parents are contacted. And we got a local film company to do this, and we showed this around schools. And it was working on the 80-20 rule of, you know, 10% of people always commit the crime and 10% won't, and then the 80% in between could do something either way. And reinforce the fact that not everybody that steals something ends up in jail, but everybody in jail has probably stolen something. So it was going down that kind of route in cooperation with the police, and that was quite successful at the time. And that's it. That's all I wanted to say, really.
Very useful. And Andrew Sharman, can I bring you in as well in the last few minutes?
Yeah, thank you, OJ, and thank you, everyone. Really interesting inputs. I put in the chat, but just so everyone's aware, that the specials program that Karen was referring to is called Employer Supported Policing. Most police forces still do offer that, so if you check in with your local force and talk to them about ESP, then you should get some direction on the way to go. But it's a really good initiative, and it does provide you potentially with visible policing in your town and city centres. So I wanted to come back to some of the earlier conversations, OJ. There are aspects there that I think, there's bits within it that made me worried. So I'm going to try and rattle through these points really, really quickly. If you are sending personal private information about an individual, whether it is a nickname or an image, that is still personal data, because it's a means of which you can identify an individual by. So it doesn't matter if you're calling him, I don't know, Jeffrey Badface, you can still identify him by his nickname. So that is still an area of risk, because it's how the person is identified. So I would always urge people to consider that images, nicknames, whatever it might be, that's data. That's how you identify that individual. And so you have to treat it the same way as you do their name, their address, their date of birth. If you're sending this stuff around, send it via secure email. Do not use Gmail or other email platforms. You need to have the criminal justice secure email. Otherwise, you're not compliant. You're running the risk of that email getting hacked or falling into the wrong hands or anything happening to it. So use the CJSM email. If you need access to that, if you don't have access to that already, speak to your local policing teams. They will be able to sponsor your application. It doesn't cost you anything. It's a free resource, but use that to be compliant. BCRP's bids, you need to think about having a data protection officer visible on the ICO's website. That's really, really important. Also think about your data protection impact assessments on all these activities. You need to evidence why you're taking the actions you're taking with these individuals. So that's really, really important. Also, I didn't pick up on it, but I'm not sure who the data controller was in Camden, but there needs to be a designated data controller who is coordinating all this business crime reduction activity. That needs to be a private organisation and not one of the public bodies, because obviously if you're a public body, things like freedom of information, human rights and all this other stuff comes in. If you're a private body, we don't have to worry about it. Information sharing agreements are really important. So it doesn't matter. Yes, a business can share an image, a report to the police about any individual. That is absolutely fine. But if the police and then loads of other businesses are viewing that same image, viewing that same report, you all need to be covered by information sharing agreements. And these need to be agreed with the data protection officers of the organisations that you're sharing with. So be mindful of that, because that's problematic. And yeah, it was just a couple of those points on ownership, data controlling, doing your DPIAs, making sure you've got a notified DPO, secure emails, and it doesn't matter if it's a nickname, a photograph, whatever, you've got to treat that as personal data and treat it sensitively. Oh, and quickly on the instant messaging thing, WhatsApp, absolutely do not use it for any purpose at all. You could say, but maybe pubs use it and say, I've just kicked out 3 blokes. One's in a white t-shirt, one's in a blue t-shirt. If another group of 3 blokes matching that description are excluded from another premises on that information, then you're viable. But the problem with WhatsApp, a lot of people get into this kind of this confusion around it being encrypted. Yes, the messages are encrypted from user to user, but there's nothing stopping anyone taking that screenshot and then it is disseminated to the world. And you as a data controller have no control or say on where that image goes, but also you can't trace necessarily which individual on that WhatsApp group took that screenshot and disseminated it. So do not use WhatsApp in any shape or form. You're putting your head in a noose. With Disk, SentrySys, ShopSafe, all the other platforms that offer this kind of correlation and coordination, they do offer instant messaging, but again, you have to be mindful of the information that's going on there, because if people are putting things into instant messaging, but you're not receiving intel reports or incident reports associated with that person so that you're keeping them on your database, after 7 days, most of those instant messages are deleted permanently and you've got no record. So if someone puts in a subject access request or someone wants to challenge why they were deterred or targeted, you have no evidence to say that this is why. So it puts your legitimate interest at risk. It also creates massive compliance issues. So just be really, really mindful when you're talking about instant messaging. You still have to be compliant. Same with your radio comms, everything else, you need to be compliant, because we're lucky at the moment that the ICO and more importantly, lawyers aren't really paying a lot of attention to this bit of work that we do. But there's a lot of issues out there, and I would urge everyone just to be safe on what you're doing. Get legal advice from someone who actually knows what we're doing around data protection. Don't just say, oh, well, Sergeant Baggins says this is what we should be doing, because that really does expose you to risk. And if anyone wants to pick my brains or discuss anything further with me, OJ, I'm more than happy to assist.
That's brilliant, Andrew. Do you want to put your email address in the chat box? And what I'm going to do is quickly, I want to jump over to Vaughan and then to Pete Mudge as well before we bring the session to a close. Vaughan, can I bring you in?
Yeah, really quickly. I do think, OJ, we probably could have had an hour and a half, 2 hours of just discussion, never mind presentation on this. So it might be worth thinking about the next session, actually just being a more open discussion on this. One is certainly in that presentation, and what Tesco are talking about, I think, is a conflation of two related but not the same issues, which is retail theft, stroke shoplifting, and antisocial behaviour, stroke assaults on staff. And obviously assaults on staff do happen while shoplifting is happening, but they are not necessarily the same things. Certainly for us in the Manchester City Centre, we're not seeing any increase in retail crime per se in theft terms, but the general attitude, atmosphere on the street, in retailers, in banks, in restaurants, even in our 5-star hotels, of customers towards staff is appalling and is getting worse and worse and worse. We've had assaults on staff in 5-star hotels and in Michelin star restaurants. So what I would really want to say is, if ATCM are going to do some work on this, this is not about retail, and that legislation I think is just ludicrous. That's just doing something for the sake of being seen to do something, because this is actually about something that is happening across the piece. Maybe it's cost of living related. It certainly is it when it's in banks, I think. But I think it's very much a post-COVID thing as well. It's about, just shouting at people and being entitled. So I think there's a big piece there that needs to be done, and we're looking at what we can possibly do as a campaign around it. The second one is, which is the point I was making, and I know we've had a chat about it, is I do think the changes, the reductions in staffing levels in retailers, the moving around of how things are presented in retail, the massive reduction of staffing in banks. I'm not saying that they deserve what's happening to them by any means, but it is making things worse. If you're a Boots and you have a drop-in centre for drug addicts as part of and you are being paid by the NHS to do that, which is the case in one of our Boots, and then you wonder why your crime figures are going up, I can tell you exactly why your crime figures are going up at that point. It's not just local staff going, it's not just self-service. Security teams are being reduced, and then security is being outsourced to a regional or even a national basis. We've got one retailer who's gone to down to one member of retail staff on the floor for 3 floors, where they used to have 4 or 5, and they're now trying to run it from a regional base where they look at CCTV to look at what's happening and they have little squawk boxes on the way out going, I notice you haven't paid for that. Well, Manchester, that ain't going to work. They're just going to get the finger. So, those sort of things are decisions being taken by retailers to cut costs. And I think that is a pushback that has to be said of, if you want to keep your businesses open, actually, rather than spending hundreds of thousands, millions on cameras and various other things, why don't you try investing in some people? Because when I talk, when I talk to my local 7-Elevens or Spars, who are run by families, quite often, family franchises, and they have members of the family in there, they don't have the problems because there's loads of people in there. They tend to know their customers who tend to be in much poorer areas. They're not trying to just cut costs in these ridiculous ways. So I think there needs to be a bit of pushback on that too. Rant over, but a necessary one. And there's a lot in there which is food for thought. And actually, on the issue of the legislation, I agree, hence why I raised the question in those slides. And also, I haven't set yet what the context for our meeting will be next week, just because, and it turns out probably to be the case, is I don't think we've even touched the surface of this topic today. And I've been thinking that maybe it's going to take another session next week where we can have more discussion. So I think you've just made my decision for me, and we'll probably have to have a part 2 next week. We can drill down a little bit more into the challenges we face and whether legislation is actually going to solve things. But I think we'll have much more time for just open discussion. And if I do have a speaker on, I think what I will try and do is approach Tesco and see if I can get them on the call. And we can have that the discussion. And then finally, Pete, can I bring you in?
Yeah, 2 very quick ones. Firstly, I link with 5,000 businesses outside Leeds City Centre, and well over half of them, I would think, are, well, they're certainly small businesses, and a lot of them are sole traders, and they're absolutely terrified at the minute. You've had Boots with the problems they faced, and you're talking of having Tesco's with the problems they face. But these are very different from an elderly person in a shop on their own, not really wanting to be there, but that's the only way they get an income stream. Just, they've got no defences at all, which leads me on to my second point. When somebody mentioned this previously, but the city centre with the bids and the support of councils, etc., rightly can develop protection mechanisms such as the wardens, etc. I've got 64 different shopping areas I link in with, and hardly any of them are big enough to merit having radio systems and so on. And the final thing, which again links that really, they don't have the money, these small businesses and these shopping areas, to have radio systems and to have dedicated response staff. So I would say the only thing they can call on is WhatsApp, which is illegal. But we need to find some mechanism, because you're talking here about people's jobs, people committing suicide because of situations they're in, all the issues of fragmentation of shopping areas, local communities. And, these are big issues. And for us to say red tape's got in the way of us being able to protect the businesses very frustrating. So again, if we can have some thought on that for next week, that'd be terrific.
I think you raise a really valuable point, and I think it actually came up earlier with I'm just trying to think, it might have been Cara that mentioned it actually in relation to Watford versus Central London. When you start to look at the broader city region, where you've got city centres who start to crack down on the problem of crime, and the bids in those city centres bringing resources to bear to try and resolve those issues, where you get challenges of displacement, then I'm guessing there's going to be a lot of areas on the outer edges of cities where you start to feel the brunt of those problems, but don't necessarily have the resource to be able to deal with them. I think that's really, really valuable, and I think that's something else we can probably pick up as well next week. So let's do this then. This time next week, we're gonna continue this discussion because I feel that there's much more to get through. Andrew Sharman, I'm sorry, mate. I see your hand
up. It's good, mate. That's all right.
I'm not going to be able to. Normally, I'd just say let's keep speaking, but I've literally got to be on a train in half an hour to London, and it's a mile's walk to the train station, so I do need to disappear. So, guys, thank you very much. It's a really useful session. Stephen, Hasnell, and Rachel, thank you for your contributions. We'll pick up this topic again next week. So thanks, guys. I'll see you later.